Thank you, guys. Can everyone hear me okay? Excellent. So my name is Ingrid Duran, and thank you, Dale, for all of the nice comments that you said. I'm feeling a little, nervous. But I know that I'm among friends. And so I wanted to come and talk to you today about planting pro-life seed in policy and what that looks like, what that translates to. So luckily, I have been blessed with being able to do this work since 1995. I'm moving into my 28th year. Actually, last week, I completed my 28th year at the National Rights Life Committee. And I feel very blessed because I get to work with states like South Dakota all over the nation, states that look very different in terms of what they can and cannot do when it comes to pro-life policy. And while I may be a policy junkie, and this is, one aspect of the pro-life movement, every aspect is important, whether it's political action and getting pro-life candidates elected into state offices, or whether it's the education route or, supporting families and supporting pregnant women with pregnancy care centers. They're all equally important. But my passion has been for the last 28 years in policies. But we have to remember that legislation is just the means. It's not necessarily the objective. While legislation is great, it provides the parameters of, how we can protect unborn children. It's not necessarily our entire objective. And so our main goal is how can we effectively protect unborn children in our state and beyond, right? And so this effective protection for unborn children has looked differently. And so I'm going to be telling the story of prior to the Dobbs decision, what that looked like, and now after the Dobbs decision, what that is looking like. How is that shaping out to be? And so, as I mentioned, laws are the means. They are the method in which we go in protecting the unborn child, but they're not necessarily the objective. And what I mean by that is that you can have all of the pro-life laws in this state, right? You can have, and you have informed consent. You have waiting periods. You have ultrasound laws. You have all of these different things, and you have a law that protects unborn children throughout gestation, which is wonderful. However, if you fail to capture the hearts and the minds of the people to let them know that this unborn child deserves the right to life, then what are your laws for, right? And so prior to the Dobbs decision, the political landscape that we were working with fell into the parameters of what was permissible under Roe and Casey. And a lot of the times, when I first got on board, a lot of those laws were laws that were dealing with preventing taxpayer use of the funding of abortion. We had laws that the Women's Right to Know law. This would provide informed consent for abortion-seeking women. So there would be a 24 to 72-hour waiting period, depending on the state. The woman would get information on the developing unborn child, risk associated with abortion. She would get information on alternatives to abortion and places like the Alpha Center and places that were near her that could help her bring this child to term. And those were, I would say, up until about the mid-90s, that was the focus because that was what we were able to do. If we had any other kind of law that would have, protected unborn children outright, it wasn't allowed to be in effect because the precedent in the United States recognized a right to abortion. And so the pro-life movement really had to get creative on how was the best way to protect unborn children, and we felt that education was the key. And laws like parental involvement, requiring the minor's parents to either be notified or give consent prior to an abortion of their minor daughter. These laws were very prevalent in the 80s and 90s, and this was what we were allowed to do because politically and legally, our hands were tied. We couldn't do more than that, even if we had the votes. And I'll tell you something. This wasn't part of my talk, but I remember it right now. South Dakota, when I first started working at the National Right to Life Committee, South Dakota was our test state because you guys are so pro-life that we were like, okay, if we're going to try something that is going to test the constitutional limits of abortion jurisprudence, we're going to try that in South Dakota. And I remember one of the first bills was doing a parental involvement without a judicial bypass, because we knew that the judicial bypass in many of the parental involvement laws was more of a judicial rubber stamping if you got the right pro-abortion judge. And so, unfortunately, we weren't successful because legally our hands were tied, but that really says a lot about you all and about the people that you elect in your state, that in the 90s, my mentor and my boss, Mary Spalding Balsh, anytime she had a new idea, she would think, let's try that in South Dakota and see if we can do it. So it was, again, we didn't get to pass it, but that was pretty much the strategy. The strategy in the 90s was just one of, we know that we cannot get the perfect legislation, and in trying to get perfect legislation, many unborn children will die. And so how can we introduce legislation that slowly starts to chip away at Roe so that by the time we're finished, Roe is unrecognizable and easy to be dismantled? And so we did this in a few ways. And one of, I think, the greatest gifts that we received was in the mid-90s. Someone anonymously dropped a how to do an abortion manual on our doorsteps. And at the time, we were located at 419 7th Street Northwest. I was brand new to the pro-life movement, so I didn't know anything. I was just like, they do that? I just couldn't believe it. And someone dropped a pamphlet from the National Abortion Federation that talked about how to perform what we know today as partial birth abortions. And if you don't know what a partial birth abortion is, it is an abortion of an intact human being in utero, where the abortionist will bring the baby into a footling breech and leave everything but the head inside of the mother. And then with a pair of Mesebon scissors, the abortionist will puncture a hole in the skull, in the back of the head of the unborn child, and suck out the baby's brains. After that, the skull collapses and is then able to pass through the mother. And with the abortion industry, what they were able to reach with that was faster abortions. They were able to run their abortion mills effectively, and they were able to have an intact baby, which would be great for harvesting organs, stem cells, because you don't have a tray full of pieces of unborn children that have been mutilated in, let's say, a dismemberment abortion. And so the National Right to Life Committee decided that Congress would, and I believe the first sponsor was probably Representative Kennedy from Florida, I think, if memory serves correct. But there was a bill in Congress that would ban the partial birth abortion procedure unless there is a threat to the mother's life. And I mean, I remember even hearing about this, and I was just like, there is no way this is legal. There's no way this is happening. And I wasn't alone. Everyone else in America was just like, we don't even put dogs to sleep like that. Are you kidding me? We're doing this to an unborn child? But I want to pause for a second, because up until then, the debate, the pro-life debate, the abortion debate had solely been focused on the mother's ability to control her own body. The focus was never on the baby. For us, of course, the focus is always on the baby. But for the American public, it was about a woman has a right to control her own body. And because of Roe and Casey, the only things that we could do were regulation bills, taxpayer funding of abortion bills. You know, we couldn't necessarily protect the unborn child, but it was an incrementalist approach, as I mentioned before, so that we can chip away so much at Roe versus Wade that by the time you look at it again, it has been dismantled. And so this gave the pro-life movement an opportunity to start discussing on the air, on CNN, on PBS, the humanity of the unborn child, which before they were not showing. They weren't showing ultrasounds. I remember our previous federal legislative director, Doug Johnson, was on Larry King Live, and he had a fetal model, and he had the scissors, and he was showing what happens during a partial birth abortion. Well, guess what happened after that? First, it was denial, right? You go through this stage where you're like, oh, absolutely, that's not happening. That's not happening at all. And our opposition would go to say, oh, that rarely happens. It only happens in extreme circumstances when the baby's dying, and it hardly ever happens. But we knew better because we know that they lie. Am I right? Okay, so we continue to say they're wrong. This is happening, and it's happening more often than they care to admit. And what happened? Well, the executive director for the National Coalition of Abortion Providers, Ron Fitzsimmons, came out, and I don't remember if it was like the New York Times, but it was like a major newspaper. And he said, look, I'm tired of lying about this. This is happening on healthy mothers of healthy fetuses, and I'm tired of feeling like a dirty little abortionist because of it. And everything shifted. Everyone was like, oh my goodness, the pro-life people were right. This is happening. Now, mind you, we had a very pro-abortion president. But that's okay. I am a firm believer, and again, I'll take you to the beginning of my speech where I said, laws are the means, not the objective. We were starting to have a debate on whether or not it is okay to end the life of an unborn child in this horrific manner where you are delivering them in a foot-length breech, putting a pair of scissors at the base of their skull, sucking out their brains, collapsing that skull, and then delivering a now dead baby. So you're talking about a mere few inches between infanticide and abortion, right? So it was very important to have the debate. And I think everything happens for a reason. Maybe there was a reason why we had the pro-abortion president, to expose how extreme not only his administration is, but also how extreme the other side is, that they would protect a horrific abortion method. Because I promise you, if we were putting animals down in this way, PETA would be the first at Capitol Hill to try to ban partial birth abortions of cockroaches and mice, okay? But because it was an unborn child, it didn't matter. Okay. But this was, again, the first time that the unborn child was finally in the debate. We had the higher ground because guess what? When it comes to strategy, our strength is the unborn child. It is the pain of the unborn child, the humanity of the unborn child, because you can't fight with science that it is an actual baby. And so that's why our opposition decided to lie and try to go into where it would have been the hard cases for us. Like, oh no, this is just happening on babies that are born dying. No. This is just happening on severely deformed babies, on babies with disabilities, and it's not happening a lot because they thought it would be okay if we're doing it in this. But then Ron Fitzsimmons gave us that gift of saying, this is happening on healthy babies, healthy moms, just because people waited. It's a quick, efficient, and very expensive abortion method. And so, because of the debate that we were having about the partial birth abortion ban, that we were protecting unborn children from this particular horrific abortion procedure, because of that, people that claim to be pro-life, but maybe they were in the mushy middle, right? They weren't quite shouting their abortion, but they weren't necessarily pro-life either, but they were kind of in the middle where they're like, yeah, but I believe a woman has a right to choose. They had to take pause, and they had to say, listen, I'm pro-choice. Well, not me, them. They're saying this, not me. I'm paraphrasing. They're saying, I'm pro-choice, but that goes too far. And so we started little by little with just this one piece of legislation that puts the baby in the limelight. We were able to get people beyond our base to become pro-life. Because what does it matter if I'm already talking to Dale, who I know he's pro-life? I know he will stand up for the unborn. We'll just be like vibing, right? We're just, because we both believe the same thing. But if I can get someone else who's in that middle, who's on the fence about when does life begin, whether or not they have rights, and I can get them to say like, yeah, I believed in one way, but now this is giving me pause. I'm not pro-choice. I'm not that. I have a problem with that. And for the first time in policy, we had people that would ordinarily vote pro-choice and against a bill that was brought on by pro-life candidates actually vote for a bill that was pro-life, that would protect unborn children from being put to death in this very horrific manner. And now, with a lot of different policy and ideas, you did have a small segment of our friends that were like, yeah, but we're against all abortion. You're just going after partial birth abortion. And there was a little bit of a fight, more like a sibling fight, right? Like you fight with your siblings. You still love each other. You agree on certain issues and you disagree on other issues. And so there was this segment of the pro-life movement that felt that we are absolutely opposed to all abortions, and we're not just going to single out this one method. And we tried as much as we could to educate them and say, listen, so are we. But it's not about this one method. It is about what the education of this barbaric procedure, the domino effect that it can have on bringing people beyond our inner circle to come back. And guess what? Those people vote. And guess what? Those people will vote for pro-life candidates because they're uncomfortable with this. And that is what we needed to have. Because the perfect legislation might not have spoken to that individual. And we see this a lot in different pieces of legislation. And so it was very important to see that, yes, the partial birth abortion ban is not the perfect, most pro-life piece of legislation. It is not, by far. However, it was the first piece of legislation that brought the baby into the debate. It is one of the first pieces of legislation that planted a seed in the hearts of non-believers to believe that, hey, maybe we need to take a second look, because I'm not comfortable with that. I thought that I was comfortable with a woman having a right to do with her own body, but that makes me squeamish. That is horrible. That's a horrible way to die. And so I want you guys to think about this when you look at different pieces of legislation. Maybe you're thinking like, but I don't like it. But think about the educational value that that piece of legislation would have when you get to debate it, when it gets passed, and also knowing that, again, and there's going to be a final quiz on this later on, legislation is only the means, not the objective. Because it doesn't matter if I can have every single pro-life law in South Dakota. If I don't get to the heart of the woman who believes, well, I'll just go to Illinois and abort my baby, then your laws mean nothing, because you haven't changed her heart. So our job is to plant these seeds, these pro-life seeds, to educate with our bills, to educate the public about the humanity of the unborn child, about the alternatives that exist out there. So after that, moving right along, after we had the partial birth abortion debate, organically, the strategy started to shift. Whereas before, and there were still laws concerning regulation. I'm not saying that we abandoned that. We still wanted to have whatever pro-life law we can get. But it started to organically shift onto laws that really illustrate and put the baby at the center of the debate, whereas we didn't necessarily have that before. And what I mean by that is that we had laws on ultrasound, requiring an ultrasound, amending the informed consent laws to include offering an ultrasound. Then, a few years after that, we decided to change that because we knew that abortion facilities will 98% of the time perform an abortion. Perform an ultrasound to either date the pregnancy and know what type of abortion procedure they will use, or to just get the location of the pregnancy to make sure it's not ectopic. And so the National Right to Life Committee said, you know what, it is not enough for the abortionist to either just put it in writing saying, hey, you have a right to look at an ultrasound of your baby. We wanted them to display the image. Since we already know that they're doing this, we want you to, and I called that the must display language. We wanted them to display it, and if the woman doesn't want to see it, she can avert her eyes. And there were different schools of thought with that. There were different laws. Like I remember before it was changed, I want to say it was either Indiana or Tennessee, they put the burden on the mom to ask to see the ultrasound, whereas other states were like, the facility has to ask the woman, hey, you have a right to see your ultrasound, do you want to see it? We also knew that a lot of times they would say things like, so the government doesn't trust you to make your own decision. Do you want this information on the fetal development of the blob of cell that you're carrying? And so we wanted to kind of change that and actually display the ultrasound of the unborn child. Again, planting a seed because you cannot fight science. When you see these now 3D and 4D ultrasounds, goodness, I wish they had that when I was having children. But when you see these ultrasounds and you see the heartbeat or you hear the heartbeat, something happens. And when you get to debate that in the public policy arena and you're having either, whether you're on television and they're showing the boom, 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 boom of the heart, how can you deny that that is a life? And so these are ways that you can just plant seeds in public policy. And these were, of course, all before Dobbs. And so after that, my mentor and former boss, Mary Spalding Ball, spoke to our director in Nebraska, Julie Schmidt-Albin. And may she forever rest in peace. She is one of the bravest champions for the pro-life cause, good friend to me, and proud Husker. And but Julie had a problem, and his name was Dr. Leroy Carhart. He was planted in Nebraska. He lived in Nebraska and would often get women that would travel to that state to have abortions later in pregnancy. And so Julie and Mary and I are talking, and she's just like, how can we stop Dr. Carhart? How can we do this? And the people on the outside looking in would say something like, well, Nebraska has a post-viability abortion ban. Yeah, but that means nothing. Okay? Let me just tell you right now, post-viability abortion bans that were passed in the 80s and 90s and a little bit after that weren't that great because they had a health standard that allowed, well, first of all, they had a subjective standard that allowed the wolf to look after the sheep. So the doctor got to decide whether or not viability occurred, which, what do you think Dr. Carhart was saying? Yeah, that baby's not viable. And then on top of that, there was a health exception in there that the abortion could be performed on a viable unborn child if the doctor believed that there was a threat to the woman's health. And health meant anxiety, her ability to fit in a bikini afterwards. Will that impact her life? That's a health exception, you know? And so we already knew, because he was operating free and wild in Nebraska and people were traveling to Nebraska to have abortions late in pregnancy, this post-viability ban was a farce. It looked like they had a law, but in reality, unborn children were still dying, viable and unviable. And so Mary, in her wise, excellent legal thinking, said, all right, we are going to draft a law that protects unborn children who are capable of feeling pain from abortion, unless there's a threat to the mother's life. And it's going to be a narrowly tailored life of the mother and health of the mother. And, her idea at the time was that post-viability is a dead issue in the sense of it empowers the abortionist to set the parameters whether or not the unborn child is going to live or die, right? But she said, the court has never addressed this question. Does a state have a legitimate interest in protecting the life of the unborn child once that unborn child can feel pain? And so she says, we don't want to replace the viability standard. We want to add this additional question. We want the court to answer this additional question. Can unborn children who are capable of feeling pain be protected? And so Nebraska was one of the first states that passed the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. And Dr. Carhart, who and I left this out for dramatic effect, was one of the prime physicians who challenged the partial birth abortion ban that had gone all the way up to the Supreme Court and was later found constitutional. He did not challenge the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. He decided to move his abortion facility to my backyard. So at the time I was living in Maryland, in Gaithersburg, he moved to Germantown, which was about 10 minutes away, which was totally unrelated but funny. I am taking my son to get his wisdom teeth pulled, and I'm seeing all of these sidewalk advocates with pro-life signs, and I was like, why are they at a dentist clinic? And I was like, dentists don't even deal with, and then I was like, oh, it's Dr. Carhart, got it. But yeah, and so with the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, we had at the time, and I say at the time because we have since changed, we have more science now, we have more, but in 2010, we had at least 50 medical articles that showed unborn children have the physical structures necessary to experience pain. And we submitted that as a matter of record to different state legislatures, to Congress. Anytime that we were talking about it, we brought the receipts. We're like, oh yeah, this is what this doctor says, this is what this doctor says. And in the case of surgery on unborn children, this is what doctors actually do when they're saving the life of an unborn child in utero. They actually give the baby an anesthetic because they know that the baby feels pain. And so this would end up passing in about 18 states from 2010 up until, gosh, I can't remember who was the last state, but let's say like 2017. States were passing laws that would protect the unborn child if they're capable of feeling pain. And similar to partial birth abortion, we did have some of our friends saying, yeah, but we believe that all children deserve to be protected. Well, no duh, Susan, so do we. But we're trying to educate people. We're trying to plant a seed. And the seed that needs to be planted is that we knew older babies get people beyond our base. We already have our base. I can already convince you that an unborn child at day 1 deserves to be protected. I need to convince other people that. And I can't do it at day 1. I had to do it at a time when they can feel pain. And so it's a little pushback, but God gives us a mission. You carry that mission out. And I'm telling you this long story long, because Mississippi was one of the states that did a Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. And every state was different. Some did it at 20 weeks gestation, some did it at 22 weeks gestation. It all varied. But Mississippi, I believe it was Alliance Defending Freedom, they said, you know what? They haven't challenged these laws. And it's true. And you know why? Because our opposition did not want to ask the court, is there a legitimate state interest in protecting the lives of the unborn child? Because they were afraid of that answer. Same reason why Dr. Carhart didn't challenge it. When Texas passed an omnibus bill that had the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act and 2 provisions on admitting privileges and that abortions must be performed in ambulatory surgical centers, they challenged everything but the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. But anyway, I digress. I'm getting away from myself here. So, Mississippi. Someone at Alliance Defending Freedom says, you know what? They haven't challenged the 20-week bill in Mississippi? What if we dial it back to 15 weeks and see what happens then? And I have to admit, I was furious. I was like, oh, don't change the law. I was like, that's my baby. Don't change the law. And I was like, we don't have enough articles on unborn pain to show 15 weeks. And then I was like, oh, this is terrible. This is not going to pass it. Don't listen to me, because I was completely wrong. And I have no problem admitting that. And so Mississippi passes the gestational, I forget what it was called, Gestational Protection Act. It was a 15-week bill, protects unborn children at 15 weeks. It goes all the way to the Supreme Court, now known as the Dobbs decision. And even then, my pessimistic Washington, D.C. living, clouded by the East Coast news of doom and gloom, I was like, the court's never going to overturn abortion on this. They're just going to answer the question that's been asked. It's whether or not pre-viability abortion bans are constitutional. I was like, Roe's never going to go away. But this was pessimistic, Debbie Downer, Ingrid, right? And maybe I thought that way, but God had a different plan, because what ended up happening with that 15-week bill that went all the way to the Supreme Court? I'll tell you what happened. In June of 2022, after 49 years of legalized killing, after 49 years of a so-called right to end the life of an unborn child, that all came to an end. And can I just tell you, the best thing about it was it happened during the National Right to Life conference. And so I was tired. There were storms, so I couldn't get out of DC. And so I got there the day of. And I tell my assistant, because I didn't get any sleep, I said, I'm going to keep my phone on. I'm going to try to take a 20-minute nap. I don't think the court's going to rule, but if it does, call me. 10 minutes later, they ruled. And I was like, what? So I get downstairs and everyone is just celebrating. I heard that there was a roar because they were in a general session during it, but I was just like, how awesome is that to be in a pro-life conference when Roe completely gets dismantled? Like, how fortunate, how lucky and blessed are we? So, I wanted to paint this picture because I wanted to show you just how important it is to plant these seeds when it comes to pro-life legislation, and also to just re-examine how you look at and understand policy. Because as I mentioned, even when it came to the two biggest laws that really put the baby in the debate, partial birth abortion, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, you had people that said, you know what, I can't support that because I think all children deserve to live. And so do we. However, this allowed us to get to where we are right now. If it wasn't for that incremental approach, if it wasn't for the educational value that these pieces of legislation have, we wouldn't have the pro-life public that we have today. We would have more people believing that it is okay to extinguish the life of an unborn child. So now we are tasked with the post-Dobbs era. And so far, we have 18 states that are protecting the unborn child at early stages, some up until 12 weeks. 18 states. And so now, how are we going to plant the pro-life seeds? South Dakota, you guys are protecting unborn children throughout gestation with the trigger law. Thank God, because you guys passed this many years, like maybe 2007, I can't remember. But what does planting the seeds look like now? And I mentioned that legislation is the means, not the objective. The objective is to get more people to be pro-life. And as I mentioned, you can have all the pro-life laws in this state, but if a woman is willing to go order pills, if a woman is willing to go to another state, then we're losing, right? And so what do we have to do? What seeds are we going to plant right now? And the seeds that we must plant right now is amplifying our pregnancy resource centers, amplifying all of the resources that are here in South Dakota, whether it's provided by the state, whether it's provided by the Alpha Center or Black Hills Pregnancy Center. Amplify those, fund them. Because when a woman is facing an unplanned pregnancy, if she has to choose between paying her rent and getting something to eat, abortion becomes very alluring. And we want to make abortion absolutely unthinkable. Now, I want to leave you with just one story because my time's up. But I want to leave you with something that my pastor has said. And it kind of reminds me of the stories in the Bible, like let's say Moses or the story of Jonah, where God has tasked them with these important jobs to do, and they don't necessarily want to do it. It's not, God does not care about our comfort. I'll just tell you that right now. God does not care if you're comfortable at all. But my pastor, he always says, all assignments placed on your life will present itself with opposition and opportunities. Do not look at the opposition and the challenges so much that you fail to see the opportunities in every problem. You might be dealing with a very rabid, pro-abortion, post-abortion mother, and you might think, it's of no use. But know that God placed you there for a reason, and it is not for your comfort. It is not for her to agree with you. It is for you to minister to her in love the way that Jesus ministered to all of us. Thank you guys so much.